Alright, welcome back to another Honor of Kings and AOV video. So today's topic will actually be about crit and crit damage. So I'll be mainly speaking using this Google Sheet over here. I will not be sort of showing you the in-game stuff. Alright, so today's topic is very easy. How many atrocities arcana should you use for different kinds of builds? Specifically the amount of crit that you have in your build. Let's say you have 20 crit. Then how much arcana, how much atrocity arcana should I use, and how much rampage arcana, which boosts your crit damage, how much of that should I use in order to maximize my damage? So I will be able to cover this topic relatively quickly because it's not really that complicated. So for the first column, we have the atrocity count. This basically is the number of atrocities that you have. So you can have up to 0 and you can have up to 10 atrocities. So 7 means you have 7 atrocity and 3 rampage. Alright, so this first column I've already introduced it. Let's talk about the second column. So this is the amount of crit that you have from having this amount of atrocities arcanas. So if you have 9 atrocity and 1 rampage, this is the amount of crit that you have. Okay, and then you can go as low as 7% crit, because if you have 10 rampage arcanas, that's 0.7 times 10, so that will give you 7% of crit percentage. Now on to column C. So this is the amount of crit damage that you have from having this amount of atrocities. So if you have 10 atrocities, obviously your crit damage should be 0, because you don't have any rampage arcana that boosts your crit damage. So if you have 0 atrocities, which means that you have 10 rampage, then you will have 36% crit damage, additional crit damage. Okay, so these two columns are fairly straightforward. Now on to column D. So this is actually this calculates the amount of additional damage that you deal per hit with this configuration of arcana. So how you calculate this is very simple. So let's say if your crit is 16%, then each crit that you do on the enemy does an additional 100% damage, right? So you have a 16% chance of critting, and then each crit that you actually do does 100% more damage. So what you do is just use 16 multiplied by 100, and then you can get 16% additional damage per hit. Alright, so I think this is fairly straightforward, but the rest is not exactly like very straightforward. It's still just a multiplication between these two numbers essentially, but you need to add 100% to this figure over here. So let's say this, let's use this as an example. Okay, so I have 9.7% crit chance. Okay, then this is the amount of crit damage that I do. So I do an additional 125.2% damage per hit. Alright, so you simply use your crit chance times the amount of crit damage you do if you actually crit, and then you arrive at this number over here. Now what does this number actually mean? This is the case where you have 0 crit. So let's say if your build has 0 crit, then you will want to use this atrocity count of 10, because it's the maximum value. It gives you the maximum amount of additional percentage damage per hit. Okay, so let's use a highlight to highlight this. So let's just highlight this like that. So this is the case where you have 0 crit in your build. But what if you have 20 crit in your build? Alright, obviously I think it's fairly understandable that if you have no crit in your build, then you should use more atrocities. I think a lot of people understand this, but they don't really know like what exactly is the calculation. So this columns over here just sort of lay out the calculation and make it a bit more obvious. It breaks down the number a little bit. Alright, so let's say you have 20 crit in your build. So naturally you will add the 20 to this crit percentage that you have. Alright, so you will arrive at 36 crit percent. And then remember that each of your attacks, if it crits, it adds additional 100% damage to each attack that you do. So you simply use 100% times 0.36 times 33% chance of critting, and then you will get additional 36% damage per hit. Okay, this is in the case where you have 20 crit. So this is the configuration of additional damage that you deal for each configuration of Arcana that you have. Sorry, let me rephrase this. This is the list of values which corresponds to each configuration of atrocity that you have. Alright, so I actually just I manually highlighted the maximum number here. So let's say you have your crit is 20, right? The best configuration for you to have that deals the maximum amount of damage is 4 atrocities. Okay, so that's how you tell how many atrocities you should use. And when we come to 40 crit, you'll find that this is more or less like not really a threshold. How do I put it? It's like once the number exceed a certain value, like 30, 35, I think it's about 35 crit, then your best configuration will always to be use the maximum amount of rampage and 0 atrocities. So as you can see here, the more crit that you have, right, the more of a differential you will see between more rampage and less rampage. What do I mean? This is 40 crit, right? Okay, let's go to a 20 crit example. You'll see that the maximum value here and the minimum value here only have a difference of about 1.2. Okay, but when your crit is 40, the difference between a maximum and minimum goes up to about 8. And then when you are at 60 crit, the maximum and minimum, the differential is actually about 15. So as you can see that as your crit increases, right, the value of having rampage arcana increases sort of, not really exponentially, more like linearly. Okay, so the higher amount of crit, the long story short, the higher amount of crit in your build, the more rampage you should use. And when your crit exceeds like 35, somewhere around there, then you should consider using 10 rampage. Alright, so when you are 60 crit, you clearly need to use more rampage here. It will significantly boost your damage compared to using 10 atrocities. Now I have this final column over here. This allows me to put in any custom number. So let's say I want a 30 crit. Alright, so this will tell me how many rampage arcana or atrocity arcana I should use. So I have some conditional formatting here. This will highlight the maximum number in this list, and then it will tell me that the atrocity count that I should use is 0. Let's say I'll give it a crit of 10. I have an additional crit of 10 in my build. Alright, it will tell me the atrocity count I should use will be 9 in order to maximize my damage. Okay, let's go to a number like 28. I'm a bit interested. Okay, let me see. Maybe 27. Right, let's decrease this a little bit. 26. Okay, so 27 is sort of the threshold that you need in order for you to start considering 10 rampage arcanas. Because once your crit surpass 27, right, having 10 rampage will always deal more damage to having a lesser amount of rampage. Alright, as you can see from this calculations over here. Alright, so I do want to mention that there's a huge caveat to using this soft calculator over here. So just because this highlights the last column, last row, and there's nothing wrong with the figures, right? When you are at 27 crit in your build, then having 10 rampage will guarantee you the maximum amount of damage that you deal to the enemy, alright, compared to any other configurations. However, there's a huge catch, which is you need to get to the point where you have 27 crit in your build, right? So in the early game, you are not going to have any crit, or you have very little crit in your build, because you don't have to go to buy all those crit items, right? Maybe if you are playing like somebody who is very reliant on attack damage, like a Hayate or something, then you'll be want to build a bunch of like attack speed items, and then maybe you're playing a character that requires a bit of defense items as well, then you won't have to go to build all of those crit items, right? So at the start, your additional crit in your build will be 0. So you need to sort of have a compromise, right? if you want your early game to be strong, then you can have a high atrocity count, but you want your late game damage to be high as well, especially if you are using a very crit heavy build. um, then you want to use more rampage, right? So you need to strike a balance between the strength of your early game and the strength of your late game. Personally, if I'm using only 27 crit in my build, right, even though I know that I'll be dealing maximum amount of damage in the late game when I have 10 rampage, I still won't go for 10 rampage in my Arcana set. I'll go for more like 9 atrocity and 1 rampage. Why is that the case? That's because the differential between at max build, right, when I have 27 crit in my build, the differential between my damage with 9 atrocity is not too different from my damage with 0 atrocity. It's only about a 3% damage differential. However, in the early game, if I have something like 9 atrocity, and then versus I have 0 atrocity, the differential is about, I don't know, like 6%, somewhere 6.5%, somewhere around there. So you can clearly see that it's way more beneficial for me to have more more atrocity at the start, and that will drastically increase my early game teamfight capabilities. So even though my late game scaling will be sort of worse off compared to having 10 atrocity, I will still favor more atrocity arcanas, just to boost my early game again fighting capability so that I can snowball, right? There's no point in talking about your late game scaling if your early game you just get destroyed by the enemy, or you cannot assist your team in securing objectives or help your team in any way just because your damage is way too low. Alright, if you use rampage in the early game, you are dealing significantly less damage than using a bunch of atrocities. Alright, because you have no crit. So you need to take this into account, and you need to strike a balance between a high amount of rampage, which is good for the late game, and a high amount of atrocity, which is good for early game. Now when your crit is very high, then it's kind of a no-brainer. Let's say I'm using a 50 crit in my build, additional 50 crit in my build, then you can clearly see there's a huge differential between using full rampage versus using no rampage. So in this case, I'll use something like 9 rampage arcanas, okay, 1 atrocity, 8 arcana, just so that my early game will not be completely horrible. Right, and you want to pay attention to this number over here. So let me go for like a 25 crit build. So you want to pay attention to these two numbers over here. So the general idea is that the differential between these two numbers, having 10 atrocity and 9 atrocity, will be quite large, and then the number will get smaller. The difference between the two adjacent cells will get smaller and smaller as your atrocity increases. As you can see, this is 0.5 point of difference. This is 0.55 point of difference. This is 0.5 point of difference. This is 0.4 point of difference. So you can see that the difference is getting smaller and smaller. Okay, until it gets to this point, the difference between this value and the next highest value and the highest value is only 0.026, which is a negligible amount. But if you compare this to this amount, right, you can see that this difference is a 1% difference. It's not a negligible amount. So obviously, in this case, I will still favor having a higher atrocity count, because the differential between this value and this value is too small. It even doesn't even matter. I know that I will deal a maximum amount of damage, but if the differential is so small and the increase in my damage is going to be so small, why don't I just use more atrocity at the start so that my early game will be stronger, right? This will boost my early game fighting potential by a huge amount. Okay, there's a clear difference between these values and these values compared to these values and these values. So yeah, I think I might have sort of phrased it in a pretty complicated way, but you guys would understand the gist of what I'm saying, right? Is that you need to I would like to maybe sort of make another column over here that sort of takes both the early game and the late game um, potential into account, and then suggest the maximal arcana that you have. Maybe, okay, let me do a real time thing here. Maybe I have something like this. So we can have a mixed weightage, right? And I'm okay. This is very like naive, right? But I'm simply going to add the early game damage to the late game damage. So equals to this plus this. All right. You have something like a weight, sort of a mixed weightage, weighted average. All right. And then I'm going to add some conditional formatting here. Let me see. I'm still a bit new to Google Sheet, by the way. I don't actually know where conditional formatting. I need to use the search menu. Alright. Is custom formula is equals to I2 equals to max I2 pi 12. Done. Alright, let's use a different conditional formatting because this looks really ugly. Which color? I want to use a different color here. Let's use purple. Alright, and then I will copy the formula. Alright, and then I will apply the conditional formatting over to here as well. Custom formula is change this. Alright, maybe let's use the purple as well. Purple. Okay, so this is more accurate. Alright, this column over here is more practical. This is more theoretical, this column over here. But this is a bit more practical. It suggests the amount of arcanas that you have in order to balance out both your early game strength and your late game strength. Alright, so let me just give it like a higher value. Maybe 35. Alright, so it's going to suggest you to use like 5 atrocity arcana here. I think this is way more practical and way more like useful compared to this calculated zone over here. Let me just, how about, I need to use a different color here. I need to use like, I don't know, what color should I use? Dark blue. Holy crap. Okay, maybe this color over here. Let me change the text color as well. Okay, this look, if you can't tell, my like formatting, my graphic design skills is completely horrible. My artistic skill is completely horrible. Okay, this is really really bad. Let's bold it. Oh no, this font color is like really bad. Should I use black? Can I use green? Okay, green seems quite good. Okay, so you can see this suggests the amount of arcana that you have. So for 35 crit, I want 5 atrocity arcana, and then when I have 40 crit, I will expect it to suggest about 8 atrocity arcana to me. Okay, so here it's actually suggesting 4 atrocity arcana. I'm interested to see what the sort of the threshold is in order for it to suggest 10 rampage to me. So let's go with 50 crit. It's going to suggest me to use 1 atrocity and 9 rampage. Okay, let's go with 55. Okay, now it's going to suggest me to use 10 rampage. Okay, so the threshold somewhere between 52 to 53. Yeah, somewhere between 52 to 53. So I'm just going to attach the link to this sheet in the video description below, and then you can just play around with this. Alright, let's say your marksman build has, I don't know, like 50 crit inside, then this will suggest you the optimal amount of atrocities and rampage to use, taking both your early game and then your late game into account. Alright, I think that's it for this video. See you guys in future AOV video. Hopefully I can actually include the game screen more inside here so that this doesn't feel like a lecture, because right now I think for people who are not so like number savvy or don't like spreadsheets so much. I personally love spreadsheets, but for those who hate spreadsheets, this can be a little bit boring. But these numbers are really like the real explanation for why you should use more atrocities, right? It gives you a sort of deep dive into the actual calculation behind the scenes going on here. Okay, so I think that will be it for this video. So see you guys in the next one. Bye for now.